What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an early preview of Deathbound, a Souls-like title that I've covered once before when it had a public demo available, and I believe there's still a public demo available. But since then, it looks like the game has an official release date now of August 8th, and they reached out asking if I wanted to take a look at a preview of it. Now, I believe the preview is a bit different than the demo, so that's something to know, I suppose, but as I've mentioned, it's a Souls-like, and that's a bit of a broad term these days, so let's talk a little more specifically. What makes this particular game unique is that we're going to be shifting between several characters who are all bound together via some supernatural occurrence, with each of them representing a playstyle. I believe there's 7 in total, but you can only have 4 sort of bound together at one time, with combat, of course, involving a lot of swapping back and forth, including to set up combos that the game calls morph strikes based on how much sync you've acquired, which is a sort of charge meter for these combo attacks. But before we get into the specifics, let's start with the broader stuff. What is this story? What is it all about? Etc. Well, apparently, the game intends to be a mix of sci-fi and religion. So there's a lot of high-tech, sort of bioengineering seemingly going on, which brings you this weird mix of, I would say, very recognizable technology mixed with things that are very clearly more fantasy-oriented. And all of that is juxtaposed against very religious orders that seem to mimic a more medieval hierarchy. Best I can tell, there's 2 sort of main factions, the people who follow the goddess of death and the people who follow the goddess of life. And seemingly, a bit contrary to what you might expect, the goddess of death people, while certainly cruel and violent, seem to be more obsessed with people dying their final death, as opposed to the followers of the cult of life who are messing around with all sorts of genetics and reanimation, which I thought was a little bit of an interesting twist compared to what you might expect. Now, to that end, the game kicks off with us being put in the role of a crusader for the cult of death, before going on to start picking up other fallen warriors by absorbing their essence being that sort of soul energy from the looks of it that seems to power most everything, such as a rogue assassin who can perform your sneak attacks if you want, as well as an essence mancer, which seems to equate to some measure of a necromancer here, via Hadai, who has the ability to cast a few spells, such as buffing up all of your essence's weapons, or performing, of course, a few ranged attacks. But each of these guys having their specialty is obviously the name of the game when it comes to combat. Now, curiously enough, the Steam page specifically mentions that a lot of what is inspiring the world and monster design are the 5 stages of grief. And to that end, an early boss you fight here has a few interesting phase shifts I thought were worth mentioning to kind of give you an idea of what they've got going on combo-wise, where at first the monster is deaf and blind, so it can't see you or hear you, so it only attacks in the general direction in which you've been attacking it. But a little ways into the fight, it'll sprout some head, and then that head has ears, so it's able to more easily track where you are, before its final phase where it rips off its blindfold and starts casting magic at you more accurately. And trying to fight that while also running around combos and stuff made for a pretty interesting experience. In particular though, your fallen warriors aren't just generic props that you'll switch between, but rather they all have personalities and ideals, and how you have them bound on your sort of overall party matters because they can form either conflict or synergies with the other characters you have equipped, which will give you either buffs or debuffs, or buffs and debuffs, based on who you have equipped and how you're using them, which adds a surprisingly dynamic element to the combat that I enjoyed a fair bit. But as you fight all these things and kill monsters, etc., we gain, of course, our experience, and we can spend this at the rest points called phylacteries, which we can use to, of course, level up our characters or upgrade our equipment. Equipment is basically down to rings and artifacts that you can equip very broadly on your overall party, that can have serious effects, of course, on what they do. Leveling up does not see you leveling up individual stats, though, but rather you have a skill tree, a very general one, and then smaller sub-trees specific to each of your available characters, and then every single character also has the ability to find memories scattered throughout the levels that will earn them memory points that they can spend on larger passive upgrades to that specific character, such as attaching lifesteal to your Crusader's big morph strikes, for instance. Now, on the flip side of that, I do have a couple of problems with the title. For starters, the camera is pretty atrocious, but That's pretty par for the course as far as Souls-likes go. In particular, though, when you move your character, the camera tends to follow you, which becomes a little bit of a problem around like staircases or walls and things like that, because the camera is constantly trying to shift as you do, but it's also trying to correct itself for getting too close to a wall, and sometimes that can make it almost impossible to move out of a corner or something because the camera keeps flipping every which way. And then movement in general can feel a little janky as well. But given the title's seemingly pretty much indie status, that's not terribly surprising. And at least thus far, what I've liked about it manages to outweigh that. But I would say, early preview-wise, that's pretty much everything to know about this one. I think it's a Souls-like trying to do a few interesting and unique things, which I'm always up for. And given that this one is set to release at the start of August, when there is very little going on game release-wise, I'll probably wind up reviewing this one, as I'm curious if some of these mechanics can actually hold up over the entire course of the title, and how satisfying they feel over the entirety of the game, as I think what seems to be relatively limited progression might sort of dampen the experience a little bit once everything gets real repetitive, would be a primary concern of mine if I actually do wind up reviewing this one. So that kind of thing is what I'm thinking about here, but otherwise, it seems like an interesting title overall. Which is, obviously, why I brought you this video, that hopefully you enjoyed, maybe learned something about it. But if you enjoyed this video, or you're simply looking forward to a potential follow-up review, definitely like, comment, and subscribe. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.